My name is Mara Quinn. I was 6 when Caroline Holt adopted me. She wore white pearls the day I arrived, smiled like she had won something, and made sure every flash from the camera caught her holding my hand. There was a reporter from the local magazine, someone from her church committee, and a photographer who asked me to tilt my chin and smile just a little wider. They called it a story of hope. She called it giving back. Her husband, Richard, stood next to her like a signature on a contract. Silent, formal, obligatory. He nodded during the interviews, but never spoke. He worked in finance, real estate, the kind of man who donated to the right schools and called it parenting. They already had 3 children. Madeline was the firstborn. Poised, brilliant, always rehearsed. Connor was the athlete, built like his father, praised for effort more than outcome. Jacob was the youngest, soft, quiet, and carried like a badge. And then there was me, the fourth, the one they added for optics. The house was large, white walls, high ceilings, no fingerprints anywhere. The floors clicked when you walked too fast. The rooms had assigned colors and quiet expectations. They gave me the second guest room. It had blue wallpaper and a single window that faced the fence. The bed was made before I stepped into it. The drawers were empty, like they were waiting to be filled with things that wouldn't matter. There was no name on the door. 23 picture frames lined the staircase wall. I counted them more than once. Each one held a moment. Birthdays, ski trips, piano recitals, graduation ceremonies. Madeline's face appeared in 10 of them. Connor in 7, Jacob in 6. I wasn't in any. When I asked if we could add one, Caroline said, "Maybe after your first recital." I never had one. They never hit me. That's important. There were no bruises, no shouting, no scenes. But there were silences, sharp, practiced ones, and rules that bent for the others but snapped around me. Jacob spilled grape juice on the rug once. Caroline laughed and called him clumsy. When I dropped a glass, she said, "Do you understand how expensive that was?" Madeline borrowed clothes without asking. I was told to never touch her side of the closet. At school, people called me lucky. Teachers, administrators, even the janitor. They said things like, "You must be so grateful to be part of such a strong family." I smiled and nodded. I learned early how to agree with lies that made people feel charitable. Caroline liked to talk about generosity. She told stories at church about the importance of compassion. She sat me beside her at charity auctions and introduced me as our Mara. She said it with the same tone you'd use for a rescue dog, polished, proud, and detached. I was never allowed to call her Mom. She said it would confuse the younger ones. Richard didn't talk to me unless he had to. He wrote checks, bought uniforms, corrected posture at the dinner table. He asked Madeline about school debates, asked Connor about lacrosse, asked Jacob about his drawings. He asked me if I'd cleaned my plate. I learned to be useful. I helped set the table, did extra credit, folded Connor's laundry when he forgot. I didn't ask for things, didn't complain, didn't cry unless the door was closed. They didn't talk about my mother, not the one who signed the papers, the one I came from. Her name was Elena. That's all I knew. I asked once if I could write to her. Caroline said it wasn't necessary. She said, "Some people aren't meant to be mothers." And that was the end of it. At 16, Madeline got a car. Connor got a new lacrosse bag and a custom jersey. Jacob got a full bedroom remodel. I got a gold-plated necklace, no engraving. When I asked if I could choose something to be written on it, Caroline said, "Let's not make it too complicated." I wore it anyway. 3 months before I turned 18, I found the will. It was sitting on Caroline's desk, open under a paperweight. The document was crisp, indexed, annotated, every asset labeled, every trust split, every property assigned. Madeline, Connor, Jacob. Each name appeared again and again. I looked for mine. I didn't find it. Not once, not even in passing. I stood there for a long time, not angry, just awake. They had never intended to keep me. I was temporary, a gesture, a headline, a good deed, expired. I left 1 week after graduation. No argument, no goodbye, just a train ticket and a duffel bag. Richard didn't say anything. Carolyn handed me an envelope and said, "You'll want to be practical." It held $200 and a pamphlet about budgeting. I moved 3 states away, got into a public university, worked nights, lived small, and I never heard from them again. Not until the letter arrived. From a lawyer named Talia Min. She said she represented the estate of my biological mother, Elena Quinn, and she needed to speak with me immediately. The law office was small, clean, no name on the door. The woman who greeted me introduced herself as Talia Min. Late 30s, sharp black blazer, voice like she had said everything important before and was now just repeating herself. She offered water. I declined. She slid a folder across the table. "This is from your mother," she said. I stared at the name printed on the file tab, Elena Quinn. It felt like reading something I had no permission to touch. Talia sat in silence while I opened it. There were 5 things inside: a copy of Elena's will, a deed, a key, a photo, and a letter. I looked at the photo first. It was faded but clear. A woman with dark eyes and a tired smile holding a toddler, me, in front of a small brick apartment. I remembered the sweater, but not the face. The letter was handwritten, short, uneven, but intentional. "Mara, I never wanted to leave you. I was told I had no choice. They said it would give you a better life. I didn't believe them. But I believed I was powerless. I never stopped looking. I'm sorry I found you too late. Everything I have is yours. Be who you are, not who they wanted you to be." Elena. I folded it once and placed it back in the folder. I didn't cry. Talia cleared her throat. "She passed 3 weeks ago," she said. "Ovarian cancer. She didn't want treatment. Spent the last year getting everything in order." I nodded. She opened the will. It was brief. 4 pages. All assets were transferred to me. A modest estate account, a life insurance policy, and a fully owned property. A 2-story home in a coastal town I'd never heard of. "Did she ever try to contact me?" I asked. Talia hesitated. "Yes, many times. The Holts refused. My breath held, but I didn't let it show." She continued. "She hired me 5 years ago, asked me to track your adoption records. It took time, but I found you after you left the Holtz household. And she never reached out. She said she wanted you to come back on your terms." I don't remember walking home. I remember the cold, the smell of paper still on my fingers, and the ache that didn't feel like loss, only validation. I wasn't abandoned. I was erased. That night, I searched everything I could about Elena Quinn. She was a nurse's aide, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment until 2 years before she died. No marriage record, no siblings. A few debts cleared before her passing. But there was one detail I almost missed. The property she left me, 112 Harbor Lane, was purchased through an anonymous trust. I traced it back and found the name of the trust's administrator, Richard Holt. I sat still for a long time. The floor was cold under my feet. The memory was older than language. Caroline, holding my hand at a charity luncheon, smiling for a camera, whispering, "You're safe now," and Richard, silent beside her, just like always. I called Talia the next morning. "Why was Richard Holt the administrator?" I asked. She didn't sound surprised. Elena asked for discretion. She believed if the house was bought under her name, the Holts would interfere. I waited. There was an agreement. Talia said carefully. Elena wanted to create something stable in case she ever found you again. She asked him to purchase the house and hold it in trust until she paid it off. He agreed. She completed all payments within 3 years. Why would he help her? Because she knew something. Talia didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. A week later, I traveled to Harbor Lane. The house was simple, pale blue, white shutters, a yard full of untrimmed grass and stubborn flowers. It was the first place that had ever been mine. I walked through each room slowly. There were marks on the walls from old photos, an empty vase by the window, and a bookshelf lined with titles about parenting, trauma, and resilience. On the kitchen counter was a notebook. Inside were budget breakdowns, meal plans, and a note at the bottom, "For Mara, in case she ever comes back." I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because for the first time in my life, no one was watching me. No one was measuring my gratitude. No one was performing goodness in my name. It was quiet, and it was mine. The next morning, I went to the county records office. I wanted to see if there were any liens, any old documents, any trace of what Elena had feared. What I found was a boundary line, a stretch of land that extended into another lot, a familiar address, the Holt summer home, built 20 years ago, technically leased through a trust. I pulled the file. The name on the deed was still there, Elena Quinn, and now, legally, Mara Quinn. Me. I walked outside. The sky was clean, the wind cold, and I smiled, not out of joy, but out of clarity. Caroline had always said legacy was about intention. I intended to end theirs. The Holt family called it the Lake House. 2 stories, wraparound deck, white wood siding that peeled a little in the summers. It sat on a hill that overlooked the water, with tall reeds at the edge, and an old dock they used to stain every other year. I had only been there twice, once at 10, when Carolyn brought me along to help carry linens, and once at 15, when Jacob begged her to let me come for his birthday. I slept in the detached garage both times. They said the house was full. I remembered details I shouldn't have. The scratch in the hallway floor from Connor's hockey bag. The cracked window by the pantry that had never been replaced. The initials carved into the deck rail. MH plus Edie Madeline and her first boyfriend. Even then, the place felt curated, fragile, like something that didn't want to be touched too hard. It made sense now. It was never really theirs. At the records office, I requested a copy of the full property history. The clerk raised an eyebrow when he saw the original deed. "Don't get many people asking about the Holt house," he said. I said nothing. He handed over the file, and I read. The house had been built in 2003. The land was leased, not purchased. The lease agreement was vague, open-ended, renewed every 5 years through a trust now listed under Mara Quinn. Elena had retained ownership of the land. Richard had signed the development agreements. Everything was technically legal, but barely. If they missed a payment, the lease could be revoked. If ownership transferred, the lease could be challenged. And with Elena dead, it had transferred to me. I didn't go straight there. I waited. I read every clause, every signature. I wanted to understand the structure of their control, what they had built, what they had hidden, what they had assumed would never be questioned. Caroline once said that a well-run life was like a well-run trust, invisible, smooth, and self-renewing. She didn't know I'd one day hold the paper. It took 3 days to gather everything. I called Talia again, asked her how long it would take to file for formal transfer of ownership. She said the paperwork was already drafted. Elena had prepared for this. Talia paused, then said, "You know, she always believed you'd come back." I didn't answer. Some beliefs don't make a difference when they arrive late. I drove to the lake house on a Monday. The gate was open. I parked at the base of the driveway and walked the rest of the way. Gravel shifted beneath my shoes. My shadow touched the porch steps before I did. I knocked once. It was Jacob who opened the door. He looked taller than I remembered, older. He blinked like he wasn't sure if I was real. "Mara?" I nodded. His mouth opened, closed. Then he stepped aside. "Mom's inside." The living room was warm. Pine walls, antique lamps, the same rug with the faded navy stripes. Caroline stood near the fireplace, a glass of wine in one hand, a file in the other. When she turned, her expression didn't change. She didn't ask how I'd been. She didn't ask why I came. She said, "I was wondering when you'd find out." She didn't sit. Neither did I. There was no pretense left between us. She glanced at the folder in my hand. "So, you're the owner now?" "Yes," I said. She sipped her wine. "This house was built for family." "It's not yours," I replied. Her jaw tightened. "You lived in our home. We gave you everything. And this is how you thank us." "You didn't give me anything," I said. "You put me on display and kept me off the books." "That's not true. You left me out of the will." She didn't deny it. I stepped forward. "You have 90 days, then I'm terminating the lease." Caroline laughed, quietly, bitterly. "And what will that do, Mara? Leave us homeless. You think anyone will believe you're the victim here?" "I don't care what they believe." She studied me, then said, "We raised you." "No," I said. "You used me." I turned and walked out without another word. Jacob followed. At the steps, he stopped me. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was soft, almost sad. I looked him in the eyes. "You think this house is yours," I said. "But it was bought with silence, maintained with lies. Every memory you have here was built on something stolen." I didn't know. I did. And then I walked away. Back at the Harbor Lane house, I stood in the yard and watched the wind move through the tall grass. This was mine. Not because someone handed it to me, but because someone remembered me. Because someone tried. Because someone knew what it meant to be erased and left something behind anyway, not for gratitude, but for justice. I called Talia the next morning. "I want to draft the notice," I said. She asked if I was sure. I said yes. It was time to take everything back. The formal notice was 26 pages long. Talia sent it to me for review before filing. I read every word, twice. Most of it was technical. Dates, boundaries, violations of the lease, applicable clauses under state property law. But one sentence sat heavy on the page. "The new owner has elected to terminate the current agreement and reclaim full rights to the property at 112 Lakeview Drive." Owner. That word had weight. Not like daughter, not like charity, not like burden. Owner. That one I believed. Talia filed the notice the next morning. Certified mail, email, a physical delivery with a signature request. No one signed, but someone read it. Because 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was low, cold, legal. "This is Andrew Carlyle. I represent the Holt family." I said nothing. He continued, "We are prepared to contest the termination. My clients assert that the original arrangement was understood to be permanent, regardless of title transfer." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "There was no purchase agreement, no clause of perpetuity, and the lease was personally negotiated by Richard Holt. It expires next quarter." Silence. Then, "We'll be in touch." They wanted a fight, so I gave them one. I pulled records, every letter, every transfer, every lease renewal they had signed and ignored. Richard had been careful with money, but not with paper. Talia found an amendment from 2012. Buried inside it was a clause. If the trust's beneficiary changed, the new owner could cancel the lease with 90 days' notice. No conditions, no restrictions. A signature from Richard Holt confirmed it. It was dated a week before Elena paid off the trust. She had planned this all along. Still, Caroline didn't fold. Instead, she issued a countersuit, filed through a separate lawyer. The claim: unjust enrichment, betrayal of trust, and psychological distress. She said I had manipulated the process, that I'd used my position as an adopted child to leverage influence. She attached photos of me as a teenager, smiling in the background of family events. One of me holding Jacob's hand at his elementary school graduation. One of me at church, beside her, in a pressed dress and forced smile. She called it proof of belonging. I called it a costume. Talia was careful. She asked if I wanted to respond formally or let it play out in court. I told her I wanted it public. No settlements, no silence. Not this time. Caroline made one more attempt, this time in person. She showed up at the Harbor Lane house on a Thursday afternoon. I saw her through the window before she knocked. She was dressed like she always had been, immaculate, deliberate, impossible to read. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She didn't seem surprised. "I made mistakes," she said. Her voice was steady, practiced. "But we gave you a life, a name, stability. You gave me performance," I said, "not family." She looked past me into the house. Her eyes moved over the floors, the walls, the furniture Elena had once chosen. "I always wondered what she'd left you," she said. I didn't answer. She continued, "I don't think you understand what you're doing. That house, Lakeview, it's where we spent every summer. It's where the children grew up. It's not your house," I said. She took a breath, then stepped closer. "We raised you." "No," I said quietly. "You displayed me." She blinked once, then turned and left without another word. I watched her walk back to her car with the same posture she used in family photos. Chin up, smile gone. Talia called later that evening. "We've been issued a preliminary hearing date," she said. "It's moving quickly." "Good," I said. She paused, then asked, "How are you doing?" I didn't know how to answer that, so I said, "Ready." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing, not emotionally, factually. I pulled journals, school records, emails, old printouts of family newsletters where my name never appeared. I built a portfolio of silence, proof by omission, a history of not being counted, not being seen, not being included, except for show. One of the files held a scanned version of the Holt Foundation's 2008 annual report. It listed the year's highlights, donations, photos, community outreach. There I was, on page 6, smiling, holding a sign that said, "Hope looks like her." The caption, "The Holt family's adoption story inspires dozens of local families." There was no mention of my name, No mention of Elena. Just the headline, "Giving Back Never Looked So Beautiful." I closed the folder and waited for court. The courthouse was beige and tired. Not grand, not sharp, just functional, like a place designed to make things official, not right. I wore a black blouse, no jewelry, no makeup. Talia told me to look respectable, not rehearsed. We sat together near the front. Caroline arrived 10 minutes late. She wore gray, not her usual cream or pale blue-gray. A strategic choice, I'm sure. Mourning, humility, restraint. She nodded at people, like they were guests at a fundraiser. But she didn't look at me. The judge was calm. Female, mid-50s, no expression. The clerk read the case summary. Then Caroline's lawyer stood. His voice was warm. That bothered me more than anything. He spoke of family, sacrifice, complexity. He said I had been graciously welcomed into the Holt household, that I had benefited from 15 years of generosity. Then he listed what he called my opportunistic reversal. He cited the lease agreement, the timing of the termination, the emotional toll on the Holts. He ended by stating, without irony, that I was using the land as a weapon. He sat down with a satisfied nod, as if he'd said something noble. Talia stood slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She read from the lease, quoted the clause about transfer of ownership, presented the date it was signed by Richard Holt himself. Then she introduced the amended clause from 2012, the one that gave Elena, and now me, the right to revoke the agreement without condition. She didn't editorialize, just placed the signed document into evidence. Then she sat. The judge turned to me, asked if I had anything to add. I said yes. Then I stood. Carolyn's eyes finally met mine. Her expression was neutral, but her jaw tightened. I said, when I was 6, I was adopted into the Holt family. I paused. No one told me about my mother. No photos, no letters, just silence. I looked directly at the judge. I was told I was lucky, but I was treated like a prop, like a symbol, not like a daughter. Caroline's lawyer objected. The judge let me continue. I held up a document, a printed page from the 2008 Holt Foundation annual report. It had the photo, the one where I stood beside Caroline at a charity gala, me in a white dress, holding a sign I didn't understand at the time. Hope looks like her. The caption described the Holt family's dedication to uplifting abandoned children. It didn't say my name. It didn't say anything about who I was. I handed it to the clerk, then looked back at Caroline. You used me when it benefited you, but you made it clear, in private, in documents, in your will, that I was never family. I stepped closer to the table. You built your summer home on land you didn't own. Land my mother entrusted to your husband. You thought no one would ever come for it. Caroline shifted, still silent, still composed. But I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. I turned back to the judge. I'm not asking for anything that wasn't mine. I'm not erasing a legacy. I'm reclaiming it. Then I sat. No more, no less. There was no reaction from the bench, just silence, the kind that fills a courtroom when the temperature shifts. Caroline didn't speak. She didn't look at me again. Outside, Talia smiled. We held ground, she said. I nodded, but I didn't feel relief. Not yet, because court isn't about what's right. It's about what you can prove. And I wasn't done proving anything. 2 days later, Caroline filed for an injunction. She wanted to delay the termination of the lease, pending emotional review. Talia said it wouldn't stick, but I wasn't surprised. Caroline had never lost anything, not publicly, not legally. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about control. So I dug deeper, not into the house, into the money, into the trust Caroline used to fund her foundations, into the way Richard had handled Elena's payments. And I found something, a transfer. 7 months before the final payment on the property was made, a wire from a personal account under Elena Quinn, sent to a financial entity named Holtridge Family Development, LLC. The name was new to me, but I recognized the first 5 letters, Holt. I called Talia, asked her if it was legal. She went quiet, then said only if it was disclosed, only if it wasn't used to profit. It had been used to fund a renovation on the lake house. The receipts were in the filing cabinet. Elena's money had helped build the second floor of the house Caroline now called hers, the one she accused me of stealing. I stared at the numbers. Elena didn't just buy the land, she built the house and never told me. That night, I walked through the Harbor Lane house again. It smelled like lemon soap and old wood. It was clean, quiet, whole, but it had been built from someone else's damage. And so had I. I opened the box of letters Elena had left behind. Most were medical, bills, statements. But one envelope had no markings. Inside was a photo. A young Caroline, younger than I'd ever seen her, holding a baby, smiling like the flash had just caught her off guard. On the back, in Elena's handwriting, it read, "You always did like the spotlight." I folded it, slid it into my folder of evidence. Then I picked up the phone. "Let's go public," I told Talia. "No more courtroom silence, no more sealed motions." She asked if I was sure. I said yes. Caroline built her image on quiet. I intended to ruin her with the truth. The article went live on a Wednesday. Local news first, then state outlets picked it up. By Friday, national syndicates were resharing the headline. Prominent family sued over alleged adoption fraud and land theft. The photo they used wasn't the one Caroline would have picked. Not her holding a clipboard at a charity gala. Not her smiling beside a Christmas tree. They used a scan of the 2008 report, the image where I stood next to her, blank-eyed, holding the sign that said, "Hope looks like her." For the first time, the caption included my name. The details spread fast. A mother who adopted for publicity. A daughter erased from a will. A property leased under false pretenses. They didn't even have to exaggerate it. The truth was cold enough. Carolyn didn't release a statement, but the Holt Foundation did. They called it a deep misunderstanding between family members. They referred to me as Mara Holt, a name I never took. They used phrases like love, complication, and the bonds of upbringing. It was rehearsed and hollow. The comments said so. Over 5,000 people had something to say. Some called me vindictive. Some called her a fraud. But most said the same thing. It's always the ones who smile the hardest. I stayed quiet. No interviews, no emails, no social media. Silence was never about submission. It was a strategy. And it worked, because within 3 days of publication, Talia received a call from Andrew Carlisle, Caroline's lawyer. He wanted a settlement. "We're open to negotiation," he said. I wasn't. Instead, I filed a new motion: civil liability, fraudulent trust activity, and misappropriation of funds. Specifically, the renovation paid for with Elena's money. This time, it wasn't just about land. It was about theft. The hearing was scheduled for the end of the month. Talia advised me to expect escalation. People like Caroline didn't fold cleanly. They fray first. She was right. Because 2 days after the new motion was filed, Someone tried to discredit Elena. An anonymous tip sent to a journalist claimed Elena had a history of instability, that she'd given up multiple children, that she'd abandoned her parental duties. The journalist forwarded it to me, asking for comment. I recognized the phrasing immediately. It was Caroline's voice, dressed in someone else's tone. Talia drafted a cease and desist. The journalist ran a follow-up instead, a story titled, "They Called Her Unstable, but She Paid for the House." It included a scanned copy of the wire transfer Elena had made to the Holt-affiliated development company. It also included the note from Elena's journal. If she ever finds her way back, she should find a place built for her. Public opinion shifted harder. The foundation shut down its comment section. Caroline stopped appearing in public. Madeline posted something vague about truth living in the gray. Connor said nothing. Jacob deactivated all his accounts. Then came the real fracture. Talia found the signature, buried in the 2012 lease amendment, the one that gave full revocation rights upon ownership transfer. It wasn't just signed by Richard Holt, it was also initialed by Caroline, in blue ink. Next to a handwritten clause, she had added herself, subject to future agreement with beneficiary, if applicable. She had written it, thinking beneficiary meant her children. She hadn't imagined it could mean me, but the courts did. We brought it to the next hearing. Caroline's face didn't move when it was presented, but her lawyer asked for a recess. It was denied. The judge read the clause out loud, twice, then asked if Caroline had amended the lease of her own accord. She said yes. The courtroom stayed quiet for a long time. Then the judge spoke. "Your own addition gives full power to the current beneficiary. You have no standing." That was it. No dramatics, just dismissal, like a lock sliding shut. I walked past her on the way out. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, but her hand trembled as she picked up her coat. She knew it was over, and not just the lease. The story, the image, the carefully maintained fiction of who she was and what she had built. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Flashes, questions, microphones. "Do you feel vindicated, Mara? Do you plan to sell the lake house? Was this always about revenge?" I said nothing. Talia stepped in and waved them off. I kept walking. There's no satisfaction in explaining your pain to people who see it as entertainment. There's only distance, and mine was just beginning. That night, I returned to Harbor Lane. I lit a candle in the kitchen, opened Elena's notebook again, and wrote something on the last page. Not a journal entry, just a line. She taught me how to survive her. Now I'm learning how to live without her. The house was quiet. No photographers, no donors, no matching outfits, just me. And the name I was never meant to keep. The letter came on a Monday. No return address, no stamp, just a plain envelope slipped through the door at Harbor Lane. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed, neat margins, 12-point font. It read, "You don't know me, but I knew Elena. She used to write me letters before everything went quiet. I think she wanted to keep the memory of you alive. I just wanted to tell you, she never stopped calling you her daughter. She didn't give you up. She was forced to. I'm sorry it took this long. H. I stared at the signature for a long time. H. No first name, no address, no phone number. Just the last link in a chain of people who had tried and failed to bring me home. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Some truths don't cut anymore once you've lived long enough in the scar. But I folded the letter and placed it next to Elena's photo, a quiet offering, one acknowledgement more than I was ever given under Caroline's roof. Later that night, I sat in the old reading chair, the one by the front window. I flipped through the newspaper. Buried in the community column was a short update. Holt Foundation pauses operations indefinitely. No public statement, just silence. The same kind Caroline used to weaponize. Now it was the sound of retreat. I turned the page, read the headlines, closed the paper. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. Not to the Holts, not to the media, to Elena, even if she would never read it. Elena, I used to think I wasn't enough, that something in me made Caroline turn cold, that maybe silence was my fault. But now I understand. You were erased to make space for someone else's story, and I was put in a costume to make it look complete. I thought I was unworthy, but I was just inconvenient. And still, you left me something. Not just the house, a paper trail, a signature, a name. You made sure I'd be found again. I'm sorry it took this long. I'm here now. Mara. The next morning, I went to the lake house one last time, not to negotiate, not to check on the property, just to look. The yard was empty, no cars, no laughter, no wine glasses on the deck. The Holt nameplate had been removed from the mailbox. They were already gone. I stood at the edge of the dock and watched the water ripple. This was the place they used to call theirs, but it had never been theirs. Not really. They built it on borrowed ground, and I had taken it back. I didn't stay long. Closure isn't something you find in places. It's what you carry out with you. Before I left, I opened the front door, walked through the empty hallway. The house still smelled like pine wood and lemon polish, but something was missing. The weight, the performance, the history of pretending everything inside it had been earned. It was gone now. All that remained were walls and silence. And this time, they were mine. Back at Harbor Lane, I started packing boxes, not because I was leaving, but because I was rebuilding, piece by piece, name by name, room by room. A few days later, I received a certified letter from the county registrar. It was official. The property was now listed under Mara Quinn, Harbor Lane, Lakeview Drive, all of it. No middlemen, no signatures above mine, just the name I was never supposed to reclaim. I framed the deed, not for pride, not for vengeance, for proof that I existed, that I had a place, that erasure failed. I wrote one final message, not a letter, not a confession, just a note on the back of the deed, folded once and slipped into the foundation of the bookshelf I built by hand. You wanted me to be grateful. I'm not. I'm free. The envelope was hand-delivered. I didn't send a lawyer. I didn't need a sheriff. Just a courier in a plain black suit holding a file with 3 pages. Page 1, formal eviction notice. Page 2, termination of all remaining leases tied to the Quinn Trust. Page 3, a cover letter signed by me. Effective immediately, the property at 112 Lakeview Drive is no longer available for residency. All furnishings and structures may be retrieved by appointment. Keys are expected to be returned within 5 business days. I didn't sign with a flourish, just Mara Quinn, owner. Talia said I didn't need to go in person, but I did. I drove by once. No announcement, windows dark, curtains pulled, no cars in the drive. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt accurate. This is what a legacy looks like when it's built on denial. It doesn't collapse, it evaporates. I didn't stop the car. I didn't get out. I just drove past, rolled down the window, and whispered to no one. You should have never put my name on the paperwork if you wanted me to disappear. Then I drove home.